Evolution, the beautiful process of suffering that took us from incoherent monkeys to slightly conscious brains. But what if I were to tell you not only do we evolve, so does our media, and it doesn't take a billion years to see. When I got into anime, all of them kind of looked like these shows, and personally, I didn't care. I was so used to the Western style of media that I just kind of assumed these shows were the normal Japanese style. Little did I know, this style came from decades of animation progression, and in barely 10 years, the most popular shows would look completely different. But wait a minute. Why do all the seasons of this show look completely different when all the seasons of this show look the exact same? Okay, I'll just read the manga and surely... Okay, so, how did we get here? 1945. After World War II, America helped to reintegrate Japan because 4% of their population was dead, their production pipelines were destroyed, and we wanted to fix their ideals. American media flooded Japan, specifically movies, comics, and Disney. Artists loved this style, and with loosened censorship, manga exploded with stories like Astro Boy. This story opens with the death of a child and a grieving father trying to bring him back as a robot. A decade after the release of the manga, we get Astro Boy again, but this time in living motion, aka the birth of modern anime. From the 60s to the 90s, anime was mostly about faithful translation. Studios weren't trying to reinterpret manga, just preserve it. And that's how the large eye aesthetic and emotionally rich episodic storytelling became the standard. Though there were still early changes. Dororo's 1969 adaptation pushed darker, more mature designs, and colored television in the 70s turned palettes into a new creative variable. Oh yeah, there was also another Astro Boy adaptation with the advent of color, and this one is much better than the last one. But as anime enters the 2000s, there are 3 changes that will become widely apparent. Number 1. Anime is really popular across the world now. Akira did crazy numbers when it was released in America, Ghibli has created its own market, Ocean Waves pending, and shows like Dragon Ball, Sailor Moon, and Pokemon have gained huge traction. And with all those people watching, there are also a lot more people now animating and innovating. Global popularity didn't just expand anime, it industrialized it, which is why we now have number 2, the computer. More specifically, animated composition. The shift from physical cells to digital drawing and composition radically altered how anime was made. Artists can now draw, composite, and reuse assets entirely on their computers, while CGI and 3D tools rapidly mature. All the while, working conditions get worse, production becomes faster, more modular, and more pipeline-driven. Side note, in 2009, we get yet another adaptation of Astro Boy, and Nicolas Cage is in this one.
I'm sorry, Toby, but it's unavoidable.
The surface dwellers are firing at us? Oh, this is what I've been waiting for. Declare war on them. This is gonna get me reelected.
Yeah, let's not talk about that ever again. But those faster production lines lead us to number 3. Remember earlier how I said mangaka's works are being faithfully adapted? Well, that's happening way too quickly now. A single episode of anime can adapt months worth of manga, and with the new production pipeline, those episodes are being churned out faster than the mangaka can keep up. Pop quiz. What is the biggest difference between a show like Batman the Animated Series and One Piece? A. The art style is different. B. The characters have different names. C. They were made at different times. Or D. While one is trying to adapt a story beat for beat, the other is trying to introduce a new age of audiences to characters and themes that have been built since the early 40s. You're right. It's A. While Batman hasn't really had a consistent art style since his creation, One Piece has been made by one guy and his assistants since the beginning. So reproducing that art style and story with a company full of overworked employees is pretty straightforward, until the adaptation runs out of material. At that point, studios don't really get to ask what happens next. They only get 3 options. The The first is filler. This happens when the anime catches up to the manga, but there's nothing left to adapt. So the anime just tells random stories that do nothing at all, until eventually the manga has made enough source material for the anime to adapt again. And then later, when they catch up to the manga, they have to do it again. But sometimes the anime just give up. They just stop because there's nothing else to adapt, and either the studio goes under or for other reasons, they just don't continue. Shout out to Hunter x Hunter and Yu Yu Hakusho for one just stopping and the other one just having a shit ending. Finally, what I find to be the most interesting choice, when they just make a new show. At this point, they've caught up to the manga and realize, well, we don't want to make filler, so they just do an entirely new and different story. Fullmetal Alchemist in 2003 is the clearest example of this. Same characters, same premise, but a completely different narrative once they caught up to the manga. And now we have two completely different anime that are equally beautiful. This also happened to other shows like Claymore, OG Trigun, Hellsing, Soul Eater, etc., and all to varying degrees of success. The question was no longer whether anime should change its source material. By the late 90s and early 2000s, the question was how. I would like to mention Death Note, which perfectly adapts the first half of its story while cutting and changing as little as possible to improve the audience experience. But the second half cut out practically everything that made that part of the manga great, only improving, in my opinion, on the ending. No one liked that. Don't do it. While fans around the world questioned the purpose of an adaptation, the 2010s were around the corner, and a case study began to emerge. Meet One. One is one of the most successful manga of all time. One is also an infamously bad artist, but One's lack of art skill is made up for in a beautifully written comedic satire of the superhero genre and the idea of power itself. So what if someone wanted to adapt these two stories, but didn't really care about his bad art style? Studio Bones, the people behind Soul Eater and both versions of Fullmetal Alchemist, animated Mob Psycho. The show leans into abstraction, exaggeration, and emotional expression using animation to amplify what one's art suggested rather than fully replicating it. Madhouse, the people behind Claymore and OG Trigun, animated One Punch Man Season 1, which does the opposite. It embraces hyper-polish and spectacle, elevating the satire by contrasting its mundane protagonist with absurdly high production value. While neither adaptation is faithful in a literal sense, both of them are faithful in a creative sense, except for One Punch Man Seasons 2 and 3. Those are just bad. At this point, studios and individuals were learning how to adapt and change stories to just make them better. You know how I've mentioned Astro Boy a lot in this video? Well, I'm doing it some more. From 2003 to 2009, the masterful mangaka behind Monster and 20th Century Boys, Naoki Urasawa, would take some of the most popular chapters from the 1952 manga and adapt them into a 8-volume masterclass. The work itself comments on AI consciousness, biases, justice, and most importantly for the time, it was a clear rebuke of America's invasion of Iraq during the Gulf War. Urasawa's work shows that an adaptation can be more than a simple translation. It can be a reinterpretation and more specifically, an elevation. But I get it. Not every adaptation needs to change source material to comment on the current state of the world. However, when I see a show like Pluto or Devilman Crybaby, I cannot help but get excited. So if an adaptation doesn't evolve the story, make a new one, or just copy the original, what should it do? That is when an adaptation should take some different artistic liberties. The aforementioned series weren't just randomly changing things, they were intentionally telling stories even if that intention started on a random episode. So what would happen if you have a series that changes the vibe significantly from the manga while telling the same story? Enter Chainsaw Man. I'm sorry, I talk about it a lot, but the story will be iconic now is already iconic, and I love it. The manga is fast, colorful, and chaotic, with densely packed action and humor, whereas the anime grounds its style in realism, emphasizes character depth, and slows its pace. These changes have led the manga and anime viewers to have very different perspectives on not only the characters, but the story itself. MAPPA, the studio behind this work, is pretty used to changing things in an adaptation. In their reanimation of Dororo, remember from earlier, while not fully faithful to the manga, was critically successful. Their changes to Attack on Titan, while subtle, heavily improve the ending narrative, even if the animation was a step down in quality compared to Studio Wit. That mixed reception to Chainsaw Man's first season had MAPPA pivot. The main director was replaced and the new film was considered a huge success. But some of the staff and crew moved from Chainsaw Man to a slightly less known manga called Jujutsu Kaisen. Season 1 of JJK was insanely popular, and each season has only gotten more popular. But that first season not only faithfully adapted the manga, it did so while improving upon fight choreography. But it wasn't until season 2 that we started to see some specific changes. The changes weren't affecting the story yet, but the color palette and animation style were refined to heighten movement and emotion. While visually impressive, the season was rushed, and one of the largest battles required a Blu-ray overhaul to smooth out inconsistencies. With season 3 being split into 2 parts, we have yet to see if that animation will uphold, but to be honest, it's really fucking good right now. Studios like MAPPA, responsible for multiple concurrent projects, must balance high-quality output with tight schedules, often leading to subtle declines in animation and animateur quality. With the release of JJK Season 3 and its artistic overhaul, we're led back to the question: what is the purpose of an adaptation, and how have they evolved? For studios, adaptation is survival. How it breathes life into the source material doesn't really matter, so long as money is being made. For artists, it's a chance to grow, reinterpret, and leave their mark on a beloved story. For fans, it breathes life into old passions and invites a greater community. Adaptations, like living things, evolve, shaped by what came before, yet always striving to endure. Each one preserves what someone once thought was worth sharing, while adding its own voice, connecting creators and audiences across time. When you watch, create, or share a story, ask yourself, are you simply observing, or are you participating in this ongoing evolution of ideas and art? This video was secretly about Hamlet. I'm also moving, so there won't be another video for at least like a month. Thank you guys very much for watching. My Adaptation Bias has been your host, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Doodles.
I was very popular in high school. I've cut taxes for a lot of very influential friends. What more do people want?